Hello, Laura. How you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing great.
Are you doing okay?
Yeah.
Well, we wanted to gather here this afternoon and have a brief discussion about something that we've been posting on social media and actually was in our newsletter last week.
Hmm.
Is that correct?
That is right.
And I would have to say that in working with couples, this is something that you discover quickly as you're working with individuals. And I really appreciated one of your posts from last week. You mentioned something from one of our favorites here at Trifecta, Brene Brown. And
Mm.
what did Brene Brown say about this topic that we're about to get into?
Well, we are going to talk about unspoken expectations, and
Hmm.
Brene Brown refers to them as stealth expectations.
Stealth expectations.
Mhm.
That means they're hidden, right?
Right. I think they can sneak it.
They can sort of sneak in,
Right.
right?
Hmm.
One of the things that we talked about is that another word for expectations is assumptions.
Right. Mm.
And that can guide a lot of couples in really amping up their conflict, can it?
Yes, it definitely can.
Now, when couples get into this conflict about their expectations, how does that sentence usually begin?
Well, it can sound a lot like I just thought.
I just thought that you
Mhm.
would
Mhm. Or
do something.
right. Or I just thought you would like, or I just thought you would know, or any of those.
So things like, I thought you should, or
Mhm.
I imagined that,
Mhm.
or it was sort of in my mind that this could happen this way. And then, of course, when that doesn't happen, the other partner doesn't follow through with this belief, this assumption that you had in your mind.
Right.
You're really reacting to the unfulfilled wish or assumption that you had in your mind,
Mhm.
not so much the partner's inability to follow through with that. Yeah, so that's where the rub sort of comes in. And I think that's one of the things in working with couples is trying to guide them to understand that you're reacting to this unspoken expectation that you have in your mind that for some reason you had a belief that your partner should have known this.
Right. I mean, and sometimes you don't even realize that you have this expectation. That's what makes it truly stealth, because sometimes you don't even realize that you were expecting something.
Okay, now you're intriguing me with that. I want you to unpack that just a little bit for everyone who's listening.
Okay. I can best do it through an example.
Okay, give an
So,
example.
just a little while back, we were going to go on a trip. We were meeting another couple out of town, and I thought in my mind that we would be leaving at a certain time. And so I had notified the other couple, hey, we should be arriving into town at this certain time. And I was all packed and ready to go at that time. And that time rolled around. And guess what? We weren't leaving at that time. And you know why? Because I had never communicated that to you. I had assumed that you would just be home right after your last appointment. And I just assumed that we would be leaving shortly after that time. And so you left your last appointment. You stopped to get gas, which you texted me about. You stopped then to get a car wash because you like to leave and go out with a clean car everywhere. And so when that time came around and you weren't home and you were texting me that you were going to make all these stops, I could start feeling myself getting a little bit annoyed, but then I had to realize I had this expectation all on my own. I had not even thought to communicate to you that this is what I thought and this is what I was communicating to the other couple. And so once I realized that I hadn't communicated to you, then that made me realize I couldn't be.
Thank you. So that made a huge difference when I came home, how we continued to work toward getting out the door
Right.
and moving toward meeting this couple as we were
Yeah, it could have
preparing to
been
go out of town.
disastrous, our whole weekend.
Our whole weekend could have
Right.
been
Hmm.
discussing unspoken expectation.
Right. Right.
And of course, the interesting thing about it is that the more that a couple, let's say, were to talk about those unspoken expectations, soon enough the expectation gets revealed. There's an aha moment that happens.
Mm.
That's a pretty powerful piece. Honestly, when you look at this in terms of sort of cognitive belief, it's called mind reading. It's
Right.
distorting something cognitively that we would call mind reading, the idea that we expect others to read my mind. Now,
Read
believe,
our
read
minds,
my
or
mind.
we're right trying to read their mind.
Yeah, we're trying to read their minds. Now, sometimes we might get some good guesses or hunches if we've been around someone long enough. They tend to establish sort of a pattern of behavior that we can somewhat guess. But I'm just going to warn everyone who's listening, don't play that game in your relationship, because you may just outguess yourself or outguess the situation. And then that can lead to other assumptions, which can, of course, increase your conflict even more.
Right.
So, what you're trying to say is that basically we have to learn to be assertive with each other.
Right. We have to learn to communicate out loud instead of only in our brains.
So, we have
Right.
to let our partner know
Hmm.
what we want, what we need, what we're looking for, so that our partner can have a chance to respond potentially with their own ideas.
Right. Exactly. It's so there's a couple different ways this can play out. We just talked about the one, you just should know, right? Or we have this outcome in our mind, we're going to do something and we think that our partner is going to respond a certain way. And it just doesn't happen the way we think it's going to happen. And then we get all upset about it because they didn't exactly respond the way we thought they were going to. And then there's a third way this can happen is when we have an expectation that something should be done a certain way because, well, I mean, that's the way we do them. Everybody should do them that way, right? So we think that, our partner should, load the dishwasher the same way that we do or something like that. And then we get mad, when it doesn't happen that way. So,
Yeah, very good. So we all have this idea in our mind about how we want the day go to the for the event to go, for the dishwasher to be loaded, for the laundry to be folded. And there's this assumption that my way could be the correct way, and I need you to become an ally with me in this.
right.
Now, sometimes that is reasonable to talk about how we prefer certain things to happen. But I think your point is, don't hold back, but also don't come at your partner in a critical way and hold them accountable for things that they simply don't know.
Right. Hmm.
Okay. So let's say, for example, that you were working with a couple and you discovered that they had some of these unspoken expectations or landmines, as we call them. I think
Hmm.
Dr. Gottman calls them landmines in marriage. We step on them, boom, here's the explosion, here's the conflict. We have to work on trying to recover that conflict. How would you coach a couple to work toward better understanding of each other's hopes, dreams, wishes, desires? What would you encourage them to do?
Well, you're definitely the relationship expert, Dwayne, but I would definitely say that it starts with open communication. It starts with talking. Take, for instance, that situation that I had just described. You know, that morning before you left for work, if I'd have just said, "Hey, I was thinking we'd be leaving around 4 o'clock and meet our friends around 7. What were you thinking?" And then that would have given you the opportunity to say, "Well, after my last appointment, I have to stop and get gas. I like to run through the car wash, and so on and so forth, so that I could have adjusted my expectation.
Very good. So we want to be open, clear, honest, and be able to receive some feedback and potentially negotiate toward some idea in the marriage that will work for both partners to meet the need to get out the door, to go meet the couple, to go on the trip for the weekend.
Right, right. I mean, we have to be flexible, and we have to be willing to adjust our expectation so that we can get along.
Yeah, so that we can get along. And isn't that the key of all of this? So that
Mhm.
we can get along and really learn how to speak the truth in love to one another.
Right.
I mean, ultimately that's what we're aiming for, is to speak the truth, to love in one another so that we're building each other up. We're not tearing each other down. We're not assuming. We're not practicing mind reading. We're not trying to tell the future. We're not getting into all of those sort of distorted ways of communicating with each other. And we know this takes time, it takes practice, it takes honesty, it also takes vulnerability, and it actually requires some risk taking
And
because,
self-awareness,
yeah,
we have to realize when we're doing it, and it doesn't matter how good your relationship is. We all fall into this trap. And so it just takes awareness that, hey, anytime we feel some resentment or anger or something rising up in us, just stopping and asking ourselves, was there something I didn't communicate?
yeah, that's a really good point. And I think you said something that's so valuable that most of us, uh, I would say I've done it too. So I'm not going to speak for everyone. I'm going to say that I've done it. It's a lot easier for me to look at the fault of the other person than it is for me to hold up the mirror and look at
Mm-hmm. Of
myself.
course.
And quite honestly, it's sort of what Albert Ellis said, is that the best times of our lives begin when we discover that our problems are our own. And that's a great place for us to start with discovery, is looking at ourselves first. It's sort of the old wise teaching of the speck and the plank.
Hmm.
And I think that's a valuable piece for all of us to consider as
Right.
we're trying to become better with our relationships and our relating with one another to grow into the couple that we imagine that we can be and bring out the best in each other. Well, thank you so much, Laura, for your timely conversation.
Oh, you're welcome.
All right. Was there anything else you'd like to say before we close out?
Oh,
All right. We'll see you.
all
Bye.
right.
Bye bye.
Bye.